At 5:21 in the morning on July the 23rd, the ground beneath the Texas Panhandle did something it has done only 3 times in the entire 20th century combined. A magnitude 5.0 earthquake ruptured roughly 24 miles southeast of Spearman in rural Roberts County, shaking homes as far away as Oklahoma City and Tulsa, more than 250 miles from the epicenter. According to the United States Geological Survey's own earthquake catalog, this is the strongest quake ever recorded in the Texas Panhandle, or in only the 4th earthquake of magnitude 5.0 or larger to strike the region since 2011, compared to just 3 such quakes across the entire span from 1900 to 2011. That acceleration is the real story here, not the shaking itself. The USGS has not yet formally assigned a cause to this specific earthquake, and that hesitation is not bureaucratic caution. It reflects a genuinely difficult scientific question because the Texas Panhandle sits directly above one of the most intensively studied and most contested earthquake zones in the entire country, a region where ancient, long-dormant faults and modern oil and gas wastewater disposal are known to interact in ways scientists are still working to fully untangle. This is the story of what actually happened beneath Roberts County that morning, what decades of research into Panhandle earthquakes have already revealed about what has been waking these old faults up, and why even the world's leading earthquake monitoring agency is being careful not to jump to conclusions about this one. No exaggeration, just what the USGS, the Texas Railroad Commission, and the researchers who have spent years studying this exact region are actually reporting. Drop a comment and tell me if you felt this earthquake, whether you were in the Texas Panhandle itself or as far away as Oklahoma or New Mexico, because the reach of this one was genuinely unusual for a region most people do not associate with earthquakes at all. I read every one of these. If you want grounded science coverage instead of recycled panic, subscribe. It is free. And a like helps this reach people across the region before the next one of these strikes. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Now let us get into it. To understand why this earthquake is genuinely notable rather than routine, you first need to understand what the Texas Panhandle's underlying geology actually looks like, and why it makes attributing any single earthquake there so complicated. The region sits atop what geologists call a basement uplift, a section of extremely old, deeply buried rock, in places over 1 billion years old, that was fractured by tectonic forces long before humans existed, leaving behind a dense network of ancient faults that have mostly sat quiet for hundreds of millions of years. Those faults did not disappear simply because they stopped moving. They remain locked in place under enormous pressure, capable of slipping again if that pressure is disturbed, whether by entirely natural tectonic stress or by something considerably more modern. Since the Panhandle's oil and gas industry has grown, operators have injected enormous volumes of wastewater, the extremely salty fluid produced alongside oil and gas extraction, back underground for disposal, a process that raises pressure within the pores of deep rock formations. When that added pressure reaches an already stressed ancient fault, it can effectively lubricate the fault enough to let it slip, releasing an earthquake that would likely not have occurred, or would not have occurred yet without that added pressure. Scientists refer to this as induced seismicity, and it is a well-documented, extensively studied phenomenon across multiple regions of Texas, not a fringe theory, having been formally documented by researchers as early as the 1980s, decades before it became a subject of widespread public attention or formal regulatory concern. The scale of wastewater injection specifically tied to the Panhandle has been substantial enough that researchers have been able to study its relationship to regional earthquakes in real detail. A peer-reviewed study published in the AAPG Bulletin analyzed underground injection control wells and earthquake activity across the Texas Panhandle from 1983 through 2018, identifying nearly 2,000 active disposal wells across that period, and 64 earthquakes of magnitude 2.5 or greater. The same study found that 61% of those earthquakes carried minimal or stronger evidence of being induced by a combination of underground injection and broader oil and gas operations, and that the average rate of earthquakes in the region nearly tripled, climbing from roughly 1.2 events per year between 1983 and 2007 to 3.5 events per year between 2008 and 2018, a period that closely tracks the broader expansion of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing across Texas. That timeline matters, since Texas as a whole experienced a similar pattern well beyond the Panhandle specifically, most notably in the town of Timpson in East Texas, which recorded a magnitude 4.8 earthquake in 2012, the largest ever recorded in that area, in a part of the state with essentially no prior earthquake history at all, followed by more than a dozen additional quakes over the following 16 months as wastewater disposal in the area continued. West Texas's Permian Basin has produced an even more extreme version of the same pattern, with Stanford researchers documenting hundreds of induced earthquakes there since 2014 alone, tied directly to the enormous volumes of wastewater generated by that region's intense shale drilling activity, illustrating that the Panhandle's own accelerating earthquake rate fits a much broader statewide pattern rather than standing as an isolated regional curiosity. It is worth being precise here about exactly why the USGS has stopped short of assigning a specific cause to this particular July 23rd earthquake, because the Panhandle genuinely is a more complicated case than some other seismically active parts of Texas. Researchers who have studied Texas's various earthquake-prone regions in detail describe some systems, like the Fort Worth Basin, as geologically and operationally simple, where multiple lines of peer-reviewed evidence point clearly toward wastewater injection as the driving cause. The Texas Panhandle, by contrast, is explicitly described in that same research as one of the more complex systems in the state, a place where natural, purely tectonic seismicity and human-induced seismicity genuinely coexist on the same ancient fault network, making it considerably harder for scientists to confidently label any single earthquake as either one or the other without extensive additional analysis specific to that event. That honest scientific uncertainty is precisely why USGS identified this earthquake as the potential main shock of a broader sequence, without assigning it a definitive cause. Geology is a distinction that matters because it reflects genuine rigor rather than an agency simply failing to investigate. The immediate practical impact of the earthquake itself has, so far, been limited, even as its scientific and regulatory significance continues to be assessed. USGS's automated damage estimate system issued a green alert, indicating that significant damage and casualties are considered unlikely, and no injuries or structural damage had been reported in the days immediately following the quake. The agency's own modeling estimated roughly 103,000 people likely felt light shaking from the earthquake, with another 640,000 experiencing weaker shaking across the broader region, reflecting just how far-reaching the effects of even a moderate, shallow earthquake can be across the flat, open terrain of the southern Great Plains. The quake's shallow depth, just 3.5 miles beneath the surface, is part of why it was felt so widely relative to its size, since shallow earthquakes deliver more of their energy directly to the surface rather than losing it to the greater volume of rock a deeper quake's energy must travel through first. Local officials, including a county judge who serves as emergency management coordinator for the area, described feeling real shaking without any resulting damage, while Houston public media specifically reported that local officials have already raised concerns about what this quake could mean for regulatory scrutiny of the region's oil and gas industry going forward, a conversation that is likely to continue as further analysis of this specific event gets published. There's a broader shift worth understanding in how Texas as a state has approached this exact question over the past decade, because it was not always treated with this level of scientific seriousness. In 2016, Texas Railroad Commissioner Ryan Sitton, whose commission directly regulates the state's oil and gas industry, publicly acknowledged that it is physically possible for injection wells to cause earthquakes under certain conditions, a notable shift for an industry regulator to state plainly, and he specifically clarified that injection wells for wastewater disposal are often mistakenly confused with hydraulic fracturing itself, when in fact the disposal process is the more consistently documented driver of induced seismicity across Texas and much of the broader southern mid-continent region. That same year, neighboring Oklahoma's regulators went further, ordering dozens of disposal wells shut down after discovering they sat too close to a newly identified fault line. A direct regulatory response to exactly the kind of induced seismicity research this Texas study has continued building on in the years since. It is worth being clear about what remains genuinely uncertain here, because responsible reporting on an active, ongoing earthquake sequence requires resisting the urge to declare a tidy conclusion before the actual research catches up. USGS's own forecast following the July 23rd earthquake placed the chance of an aftershock reaching magnitude 5 or higher at less than 1% over the following week, a low but not zero probability that reflects standard aftershock statistics rather than any specific new evidence about this quake's underlying cause. Nobody studying this event, publicly at least, has definitively stated whether Thursday's earthquake was primarily driven by natural tectonic stress accumulated over millions of years, by modern wastewater injection, or by some combination of both interacting on the same ancient fault system, and given how explicitly researchers have described the Panhandle's seismicity as a genuinely mixed, complicated case, that kind of specific attribution may take considerably longer to establish than it did for more straightforward cases like the Fort Worth Basin. So what does all of this actually mean if you live anywhere across the Texas Panhandle or the surrounding region right now? In the immediate term, follow standard earthquake safety guidance. since aftershocks are common following an earthquake of this size and can continue for days or even weeks. Secure any heavy furniture or shelving that could fall during additional shaking. Know your household's emergency plan, even in a region that has not traditionally needed one. And know that USGS's own Green Alert assessment means significant further damage remains unlikely, even though it does not rule out smaller, more localized impacts entirely. More broadly, understanding that this region sits at the genuine, actively studied intersection of natural geology and industrial activity is worth keeping in mind as further analysis of this specific earthquake gets published in the weeks and months ahead, since the eventual determination of what caused this exact rupture carries real implications for how oil and gas wastewater disposal gets regulated across the broader region going forward. The honest, grounded summary is this. A magnitude 5.0 earthquake struck the Texas Panhandle on July 23rd, the strongest ever recorded in the region and only the fourth earthquake of that size to hit the area since 2011, compared to just 3 such quakes across the entire prior century, a genuinely dramatic acceleration in the region's largest earthquakes over a comparatively short span of years. The Texas Panhandle sits above an ancient network of ordinarily dormant faults that decades of peer-reviewed research have linked in a majority of cases to modern oil and gas wastewater injection, with earthquake rates in the region nearly tripling as that industry expanded over the past 2 decades. The USGS has deliberately not yet assigned a specific cause to this particular earthquake, a reflection of the Texas Panhandle's genuinely complex geology, where natural and human-induced seismicity are both known to occur on the very same fault network, making this one of the harder cases in the state to resolve quickly compared to more straightforward induced seismicity zones elsewhere in Texas. No injuries or significant damage have been reported, and USGS's own modeling places the chance of a larger aftershock at under 1%, even as further scientific analysis into exactly what triggered this specific rupture continues. We are going to keep tracking this earthquake sequence the way we tracked it today, straight from the USGS, the Texas Railroad Commission, and the researchers who have spent years studying induced seismicity across this exact region, not recycled headlines. Subscribe so you do not miss it once a more definitive cause for this earthquake gets published, because based on how long this kind of specific analysis has taken in comparable past cases, that answer may still be some time away. And leave that comment below. Tell me if learning that Texas has been dealing with genuine, well-documented induced earthquake risk for over a decade now changes how you think about the state, because for a place most people still associate with almost no seismic activity at all, that reality tends to surprise people. Because behind every one of these felt reports is a rancher in Roberts County who has lived on the same land for decades without ever once feeling the ground move like this, a researcher poring over injection well records, trying to determine whether this specific fault owes its rupture to 1 billion years of geology or a single decade of modern industry, and a state regulator now facing the same familiar question Texas has been forced to confront again and again since the shale boom began. How much of what is shaking beneath this state was always going to happen eventually, and how much of it we may have quietly helped along ourselves? Question. This specific earthquake is unlikely to answer definitively for some time yet. 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.